So this is just one way to go about filling this out. What I decided to do was start filling alpha until he got into yellow, and then filled Bravo to the edge of yellow. I hate that already. Then Charlie, then Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Charlie, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Then I got him into green. Now, I don't know that I necessarily like it that way. Now, I've bolded some of these numbers in here. Why would I bold number 4? What does the square tell me?
You're at 70%.
Yeah, but there's something important. There's something different in.
You're no longer
I went from
risk.
60 to 65 here. I went from 65 to 70 in alpha. Why is that more significant? What's the special significance?
You're reducing your amount of risk, overall risk.
This is my main effort. Risk was reduced by 1 quantum level, whatever that means. So the speed with now take a look at your notes. Did anybody get? Well, you can't. Did anybody get to a number higher than 4 in that chart?
Yeah,
So-
mine's
so
actually
think-
8, and I thought
Mine too.
my thought process on it was, as they're cross leveling the fuel, how many personnel do they actually have? Can they handle that number of tankers at
We're
the
gonna,
same time?
for purposes of the exercise, we're gonna say, yeah, if I can get the fuel to them, I can dump into them, and all other things being equal. So dramatically oversimplified. But it looked to me that this was important to say. Here was the first state change in Bravo. I mean, in the brigade, in the main effort. And now, I guess I should probably have highlighted, and I did. I bolded this one. What does that cell tell us?
15 trucks.
Yeah, when the entire brigade has now moved into a different risk posture. I didn't get to there until 15. Who had a lower number than 15?
I get there at 13.
13.
I was 16.
I was 14.
Yeah, so I think that one's important. I mean, that if I was going to start comparing plans, that one would sort of tell me intuitively the entire brigade has moved into a different risk profile. Because that's the last guy in. I've changed my risk profile. Yeah.
Task Force Alpha is your decisive. So you're shaping, and the only reason I'm asking this is because, of course, I distributed mine differently. Don't you need your shaping operations to be almost as set as Task Force Alpha so that they can shape the battlefield for the decisive operation to take place?
Well, for example, the way I've painted this picture deliberately using a mix of quantitative and qualitative measurements or estimates. I told you that if Charlie failed, there was a 50% chance that Bravo would fail. So that tells us something about the relationship between Charlie's mission and Bravo's mission.
Right.
But then I told you qualitatively that that there was substantial risk, significant risk, minor risk. Well, what does that mean? If I can convert that into percentages, I can reduce this to a linear program and figure out what the actual added value of each next square is going to be towards the overall contribution of the mission. And then we can fill this thing out mathematically. But that mathematical model is only as good as the quality and the stability of that number. Whereas if I change the numbers to 30 or 70, that might change the way you would fill this. So when you're going from artful estimates that are qualitative and then try to quantify those, that's sort of where our engineering or technical mind wants us to go. Ultimately, that's expressed in NDMP, a pure number crunch. If you use the deck mat or something like that. So there may be something about this that does not allow us to go to greater apparent fidelity. So yeah, to get back to your point though, we have to know something about the relationship between the mission accomplishment in Bravo versus in Alpha. For example, if you believe that as long as I'm in yellow, I only have a substantial risk, I could say, well, as long as I get him into the lowest level of yellow, and maybe Alpha was in the highest degree of yellow, it's actually better for me to send the next one to make him green rather than him a little less yellow, if you see what I mean. Because now I raised I lowered a risk level completely for the entire brigade. But the trick now on this mixing problem is to say, how do I reduce the risk the most, or in other words, how do I improve the percent accomplishment of the mission with the next added resource? And so this really is an important asset allocation. So 15, I'm not really satisfied with that right now. If I were to look at that again, I would probably say I think 13 would be better off over here.
That's
Because
why I
that's
had
the next
13.
best thing. You know, I leave 12, so I would now argue that 13 is a better fill, having heard myself lecture on this one. I like 13 better in here. Now, so what does 18 tell us? What does this cell tell us?
That you are no longer a
Yeah,
major risk.
I raised a quantum, or reduced a quantum level of risk in the same way that 4. So anybody lower than 18 in that square on yours?
Lower than 18?
17? 15 up in here? That's an important one because now we know that on his own, he's got at least, let's say Bravo completely failed. I know that by the 18th truck or the 15th truck, I still got a 50-50 chance of Alpha accomplishing their mission on their own. So that number is important. And I would say this one is important too, for the same reason that 15 was important over here, and that is we raised an entire risk level, or lowered a risk level for the entire brigade because of the trail. So I think, now if you just take the averages, I don't know what that means, so I was acting in order to learn. So I said, what happens if I just take the averages? If I take the averages of 11 to 15 to almost 20, that almost comes out on a deck mat weighting if you reduce the about 2 to 3 to 4, is sort of the relative importance that I have placed on supporting them just based on what I actually did. So here's a way that I could actually act in order to learn. Now I have uncovered what my intuition was essentially saying about how I felt about the relationship between those task forces and supporting them. So it's not, it turns, I think this one is twice as important as that one, and that there seems to be a linear relationship between those two. I wanted to check to see what could I find about the averages over here. On average I get into this about 10, and I don't know what that means yet. I'd have to think more about it. So here's a case where I acted in order to learn. I didn't learn anything from that action. So it cost me some amount of resources to do that math. And it turns out there was no return. There was no return on knowledge, no knowledge return on investment, if you will. So did anybody have a dramatically different strategy for filling that out? Did anybody go from 1 to 10 and then start here 11 and fill all the way to the top like our sergeant? We get some sense that there's more to this problem than a simple sentence in the, our intent, in other words, was to do something like this if we had to. Was that clearly communicated in establishing the priorities as Task Force A, then B, then C? Probably not, because we agreed at the start of this, the sergeant would not be wrong if he had filled 1 through 10, 11 through 20, because you could derive that strategy from the language. So the issue now for us as field grades and writers is that we not only have to be writing so that we can be understood, but writing so that we cannot be misunderstood. Your orders will be executed by the faithful sergeants until they get into a tough one, where apparent values are starting to conflict. We saw that in the movement experience, where it was retrograde of casualties versus forward movement of combat power, and then sorting through all those different priorities, which were not expressed in the priorities of movement, but these numbers reflect our true commander's intent. So we got to find ways to be able to communicate better than I am now, communicate our intent in order so that sergeants can execute. Because the only problems that come to you are the ones where sergeants don't understand your intent, or it's not clear what you meant, and so they're going to come to you. So every decision you get is going to be a hard one, because it's asking you to go beyond what you've already said in your orders. You're going to have to sort it out. And it turns out that the better the order you write, more clear your instructions are, the harder the problem is gonna be when it comes to you, when it comes. Hopefully that clear orders reduces the number of problems that come to you, so you can be better rested, so you can handle the really hard ones. But that's essentially the idea behind orders and communication and commander's intent, is to get their thought processes to the same decision that you would take if you're there but you're not, so they have to rely on your orders. So I don't think we do a very good job of discussing this in the core and the AOC, because we teach it it's almost a ritual. Decisive operation, shaping 1, shaping 2, sustaining operations, priority movement forward, priority movement to the rear. It's when you're stress testing your ideas and your plans, you have to take that and say, where could this thing possibly go, not go wrong, but where are going to be the collision points between competing values, and what would I want them to do in that difficult, you have to imagine difficult situations for the sergeant on the ground, and then think your way through them, time permitting, so you can make it clearer in your orders what it is that you want them to do. What I will do is I will take your individual plans and transcribe them. I'll put them into a spreadsheet. We'll see what the consensus of the class was, and if you give me your papers, I'll do that work. Questions on any of this stuff? Please push the big red button to end this farce. Thank you. Okay, you ready?